We will start with Professor Michel Prieur, who actually needs no introduction, but he is the president of the International Center for Comparative Environmental Law, professor emeritus at the University of Limoges, scientific director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Environmental Law, Planning and Urban Planning, and the Honorary Dean of the Faculty of Law and Economics of Limoges. Professor Michel Prieur, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon to Patrick, to Laura, and to Daniel. It's a pleasure for me to participate to this webinar and to give a general introduction on the basis and history of the non-regression principle. Maybe, Laura, you can begin the PowerPoint. The principle of non-regression, as you may know, is the more recent principle in environmental law. After the general principle of Rio in '92, non-regression appears in environmental law only since Rio +20. He said non-regression is quite new since Rio +20, but it's interesting to give a little overview. First, there has been since several years regression in international and national law. Regression is a reality. We can give some example. Here you see Canada withdraw from Kyoto Protocol, Guyana withdraw from Desertification Convention, Venezuela withdraw from American Human Rights Convention, and as everybody know, United States withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Next. And in national law too, there is a lot of illustration of regression. In Canada, federal environmental law weakened several times. In France, reduction of level of contamination. Mexico, presidential decree reducing the surface of a national park. Next. But environmental law, in fact, is a right to a continuous progress, always less pollution and more biodiversity. So the objective of environmental law is a better protection and a permanent amelioration of the environment. And the main issue is to get a high level of protection and a permanent improvement of environmental quality. Next. But there is a strong link between non-regression and international human rights. Since 1946, in the Constitution of the Organisation International for Work, it's written there this treaty gives a guarantee for workers for better condition, always better condition in works rights. And then with the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights from 1966, there is a progressively achieving for the full realization of rights and a continuous improvement. And there has been a general comment, observation by the Committee of the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And in this general observation, the committee says several times the covenant of 1966 does not authorize any retrogressive measure, in human rights. And as environmental law is now a human rights, this decision of the Committee of Geneva applies to environmental law. Next. And if you read all international law in environmental issue, you will see that all convention, I say all convention, always has a unique objective, a better protection of the environment, always more protection. In the Biological Diversity Convention, it says at Article 8, maintain protection of species, maintain, not reduce, but maintain. And there is a very interesting illustration in a bilateral treaty on the Uruguay River in 1975, saying between Argentina and Uruguay, not diminish legal standards and sanction, not diminish standards and not diminish sanction. That was an obligation in this bilateral environmental treaty. Next. But the best illustration in the Montego Bay Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982. Article 311.6 says there shall not be any modification to the fundamental principle of Article 136 of the Convention about common heritage of mankind, and states cannot be party to any derogative agreement. That's a very important obligation in a multilateral treaty about common heritage of mankind, about the seabed, that all states of the world takes a compromission not to backtrack about common heritage of mankind. Next. If you see the free trade agreements treaty, which are very important, relation between free trade and environment. Since ALENA, between United States, Mexico, and Canada of 1993, there is a disposition in all free trade agreement, no reduction of levels of protection in environmental issue. It's the same between US and Colombia, US and Chile, European Union and South Korea, European Union and Colombia and Peru. Next. And between the CAFTA, the agreement between US, Central America, and Dominican Republic, in Article 17, it is forbidden to make promotion of trade and investments by reducing the existing national environmental legislation. It's forbidden to reduce the existing national environmental legislation. That's an obligation in all free trade agreements. Next. But the very important recent issue is the introduction of the non-regression principle in a regional multilateral treaty, the ESCAZO Treaty, Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation and Justice in Environmental Matters, the ESCAZO Treaty of 2018. In Article 3, among the principles of the treaty, there is a principle of non-regression and principle of progressive realization. And that's very important because it applies normally to all South American states and Caribbean until, I hope, Brazil, I hope, will ratify soon the ESCAZO Treaty. And in the project of the treaty about the protection of biodiversity on further juridical national jurisdiction, the draft treaty, which is in negotiation now. In the version of May this year, there was, in the official treaty on biodiversity in the high sea, the principle of non-regression. But unfortunately, in the version now in discussion, which will be in discussion in New York in August, they deleted the non-regression principle. So we have to see if in August they reintroduce or not non-regression principle in this new IC treaty. Next. Next, European Union, you can go next. In the Brexit agreement, the agreement between European Union and Great Britain, there is a specific article in the agreement of 2020, part 2, article 2, non-regression in the level of environmental protection. That means in the future, Great Britain out of European Union must keep all environmental law of the European Union. They cannot backtrack in the level of protection in Great Britain after the Brexit. That's very important to maintain environmental law of European Union after the Brexit agreement. Next. In some constitution, you have some illustration. In the Constitution of Bhutan of 28, there is an article saying that 60% of forest of Bhutan in the Himalaya has ad eternum, for eternity. They can't reduce the surface of forest protection. In Ecuador, there is 2 specific articles about non-regression in environmental issue in the Constitution of Ecuador. And in the Constitution with the clausula petrea, as Portugal and Brazil, there is an interpretation that human rights can't be reduced in this Constitution because of the clausula petrea. And in a recent Constitution of Tunisia, in North Africa, the Constitution of 2014, there is too an article on non-regression on human rights and environmental issue. But unfortunately, at the end of July, there will be a referendum in Tunisia with a new constitution. And I am not sure that in the new constitution of Tunisia, at the end of July, they maintain this Article 49. So there can be regression of the principle of non-regression. Next. In many local legislation, there is a non-regression. In Argentina, the municipal law in Villa Mercedes in the state of San Luis have a non-regression disposition about agrotoxic. In Mexico, in the state of Veracruz, promotion of the non-regression in environmental law of Mexico as federal state. And in France, in the New Caledonia states, in the regional environmental code of Island Loyauté in 2016, there is non-regression principle for environmental law in this code of this island of New Caledonia. Next. And in national legislation too. In the US Air Act, Clean Air Act, is the anti-degradation policy. Anti-degradation policy is the same than non-regression. In Africa, Ivory Coast, in the Environmental Code of 2014, in the Air Quality of Paraguay of 2014, in the French Environmental Code of 2016, and in the Africa again, in the Environmental Code of Guinea of 2019. So there is more and more national legislation, local legislation, and environmental code. Next. And then in jurisprudence, in the courts, in the Hungarian Constitutional Court since 1949, in the Belgian Constitutional Court, in Brazil, Patrick will talk about Brazil, in the Spanish High Court since 2012. Next. But at the international level, there has been a movement of policy statement supporting non-regression since 2011, since the preparation of the big conference in Rio, Rio plus 20 of 2012. For the preparation of Rio plus 20, the European Parliament, in a resolution of September 2011, adopted a very important resolution of the European Parliament, and in the paragraph 19.7, they ask for the Rio Conference to approve the non-regression principle. So it's a big pressure of the European Union on the Rio Future Declaration. The Brazil report for the preparation of Rio plus 20, 1st November of 2011, and the Brazil report is the only report, national report, among all 9 United States member states, the only national report in November to ask for non-regression in Rio plus 20. Then we had the colloquium, I think Patrick was there, in the Brazilian Senate in March 2012. And after Rio plus 20, the resolution of the IUCN Congress in Jeju. Next. And the World Congress, before or during Rio plus 20, the World Congress Justice, organized by the Minister Antonio Benjamin, and in this Congress in Rio, they said, we recognize that environmental laws and policies adopted to achieve this objective should be no regressive. Next. And next, the final document of Rio plus 20, The Future We Want, of June 2012. Paragraph 19, it's necessary to apply former environmental law commitments. Well, that's classical in environmental law. But the most important is paragraph 20. It's critical that we do not backtrack from our commitments to the outcome of the Earth Summit. No backtrack. No backtrack is the non-regression principle. Next. And President Dilma, which was the president of Brazil at that time, in a declaration in Rio, said, not any backtrack to our commitments already approved. She mentioned in his declaration, no any backtrack to our commitment already approved. But unfortunately, President Dilma approved the regression in the new forest code with a protected natural reserve in Amazonia open to mine exploitation since August 2017. Next. There are several recent case law from the federal judge of Manaus in April and May 2020, and I made a comment of this decision of the federal judge of Manaus about COVID and deforestation, and they applied the non-regression principle in this decision of April and May 2020. There has been an appeal, but I've not the solution of the Court of Appeal after the decision of the federal judge of Manaus. And as I know, Ministra Carmen Lucia mentioned in his report of January 2022 the non-regression principle, but Patrick will speak about that. Next. In conclusion, non-regression is really a barrier to increasing environmental degradation. There is an increasing environmental degradation, and the only way to stop it is to apply the non-regression principle. So it's a response to the need for legal security, because to reduce environmental law is not a legal security. We must maintain environmental law as it exists. It's a necessity for the legal security, and legal security is a general principle of law. The non-regression obligation requires environmental equity for the benefit of future generations, and Émilie Gaillard will speak about that next. And non-regression makes, back please, non-regression makes environmental law effective, is an effectivity principle. The intangible right to environmental law is connected to the most intangible rights, the right to life, because the right to a safe environment is a traduction of the right to life. So it's not only a general principle of law, it's too an ethical and moral requirement of a continuous progress for a better environment. So only one word, less pollution and more biodiversity. Thank you very much.